I'll be sharing with you the way in which I understood descriptors. So I knew descriptors were a thing. I would have heard of them. I had, at the time, I had read about them in the Python documentation. There's a very interesting document that explains how descriptors work, except that I didn't get it. And which is fair. I didn't get it. And then, so this is my face. And I work for Textualize, and Textualize works on an open source framework called Textual. And I was fixing a bug inside Textual, and I was working close to some descriptors, because there's some descriptors in the code base. And in that particular instance of the usage of the descriptors, they suddenly made sense to me, because I created a couple of analogies in my head, which made them click, and that's what I want to share with you. Not the specific context of the textual descriptor thing, because that has way more context than what we need, but I'll boil it down to the part of the analogy that I think really matters and will make it easier for us to see and understand how descriptors work. And so Textualize is the company I work for, and then I really enjoy teaching. Teaching is a passion of mine, and so I teach Python whenever I can. I talk about Python, and so I spend a lot of time, maybe too much time, writing about Python over at that website. So before we jump straight into the code, I want to ask you two questions, just so I get a feel for the audience I'm working with. So who here has used functions in Python before? Okay, it's a very pertinent question. Okay, and then who's used descriptors? Okay, so everyone raised their hands when I asked about functions. A couple of people raised their hands when I asked about descriptors. And we'll see why these two questions were relevant. So let me do the following. Everyone says that when you're presenting, you shouldn't live code, so I'll do it, because it's fun, right? So I just want to create a very simple class that's a person that takes in a bunch of names. And so I could create, I don't know, a random dude. Let's call him Steve Holden. Just an example. And now what I want to do is I want to be able to type something like print steve.first to get Steve's first name. Now, obviously, if I run this, will it work? No. Feel free to answer my questions. Wait, what did I? Of course, you have to save. Okay, so now when I run this, I get an error, attribute error. No one's surprised. So what I want to do is, and I don't think you will be very surprised by this, is I can use a property, right? And I have a list of names. Sorry about that. Something's doing a squeaky sound here, and it's upsetting me. So obviously, I forgot the assignment. But the thing here, the idea is that if I use a property, I can dynamically access the names. Cheers. How do you say when someone sneezes? What do you say? Bless you. Yeah, bless you. Okay, so the idea here is I can use a property to kind of create something that looks like an attribute, but actually dynamically looks into the list of names and fetches the first name. This shouldn't be too surprising, right? And this is the baseline for what I will be showing, because it was this comparison between properties and descriptors that made descriptors click for me. All right? So this is our starting point. This really is squeaky. Okay. So now I'll create a second version of the person. Now, don't worry, I will be copying it. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to create a descriptor, whatever that might be, that mimics this behavior. I want to create a descriptor that lets me use .first as if it were a regular attribute. That's our end goal. So what is a descriptor? Well, like everything else in Python, a descriptor is an object. Okay, it is an object with something inside that makes it special, but it is an object. So we will create a class for our first descriptor. It's not deck, it's desk. First descriptor, all right? And now, notice, and I think this is very interesting, but also very important. So it's interesting because it's important. First was defined on the class person. You access it from the instance, but it was defined on the class. And with the descriptor, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to replace the property goes away, and we define a class attribute that gets assigned the descriptor. Okay? So far, so good. We took out a method and we inserted the descriptor there. Now, the only thing that's missing is, well, obviously this doesn't run because I haven't filled in the first descriptor, but don't take my word for it. So, what? Oh, right, of course. No, I was surprised. I wanted an error. So this doesn't error because what I'm getting is this thing, which right now it isn't a descriptor. Just because I say it's a descriptor doesn't make it a descriptor, right? So that's why I was able to access the object itself. Now, what's the secret ingredient that I need to put here that makes this a descriptor? It's a dunder method called get. All right? Everyone familiar with dunder methods? Excellent. Well, there's one here. So, yeah. So get takes two arguments, and they're the object and the class. And we'll see what this is in a second. So the idea here is, and I think this is a very powerful idea, Python lets you customize everything with dunder methods, right? In it, the dunder method init is you customizing how your class is initialized. And the descriptors let you customize how you interact with attributes. All right, so we are going to customize attribute access. That's why it's get there, because we want to get the first, and that method will run when we try to get the first name of the person. And so the things that get filled in, the object and the class, the object is the thing that owns the data, so it's the thing we're going to access. So it's actually not any object, it's actually a person. And the class here is the class of the person, so it's going to be capital person, yeah? A person with a capital P. It's a bit redundant in this case, but there are situations where it matters that you have both. But so if I'm going to take the person in, well, I know that the person has an attribute called names, and so I can just index into it. And if I run this, I get Steve back. All right, and this was your very first descriptor to get the first name of an arbitrary person. Let that sink in for a second. All it took was a get method, and if you look closely, you will see that what's inside the get and what's inside the property, they're exactly the same pieces of code. Right? It's the same thing, except inside first we use self, and inside the descriptor we used person. I apologize. Python is easier than English. All right, so if this makes sense, let's do a second one, just so we make sure that everything makes sense. So let's create a descriptor for the last name of the person. Well, it's exactly the same thing. I'm just going to copy and paste. But instead of accessing the first name, I'll take the last one. And thus, if I print steve.last, what do I get when I run it? No, not yet. Right? What's the issue? The issue is I forgot to assign. Right? So when you you define the class, that's the attribute. Sorry, you create the class, that's the descriptor. Why is it a descriptor? Because of dunder get. Then you assign it into the class where you want it to be used, and then you can access it from the instance. And now if I run this, I get Steve Holden. So far, so good? Who's with me? Okay, excellent. So, key takeaway from this first section, one of three, dunder get runs when we access attributes. I don't think anyone doubted me, but one thing I do when I'm exploring new dunder methods that I don't know is I just add a print inside them so I can see when I'm running that method. So I can do something like last get and then person equals, right? So if I run this again, it should still work, and I see a print over here. So I was inside that method, and the only thing I did was access an attribute. So that's the power of dunder methods. All right, now let's do an awkward pause while I drink some water and check my notes. Okay, brilliant. So what do we want to do now? Properties, and in particular the property we wrote down, this was just to get the first name, right? We can take a property and we can define a setter for that property, which will allow us to set the supposed attribute. And how do you do that in a property? You type something like first.setter, and now you define your method to set the first name. So if you take a new name, how do you set it? Well, you just go into names, and you assign it, right? This shouldn't be surprising. So if I go and I replace Steve's name with my own, and if I run this, now Steve is no longer called Steve, Steve is now Rodrigo, right? And now what I want to do is, I want to see what's the analog to this setter, to this property setter, in the descriptor world. But I'm pretty sure you can guess it. So if dunder get runs to get the value, what dunder do I need to set a value? Dunder set, exactly. So how do I do this? Well, I go here, I type dunder set. I'm still taking a person in, but now instead of the class, what do I get? It's the value, exactly. It's the value, or in this case, a name, the name that I want to set. And so I can just do person.names 0 equals name. Will this work? Hopefully it will. Let's see. Let's take Steve and let's replace his name with my name. And let's run this. See that we got a Rodrigo here? So set, dunder set lets you, was this me breathing? Maybe. Dunder set lets you customize the way you set attributes. And if I were to do it for the last, it's just the same thing, right? It's pretty boring. I just change the 0 with the -1. Now, there's an issue with the code that's in front of you. Well, it's a subjective issue, but it's an issue. And the issue is the first and the last descriptors, they're essentially the same. The only thing that's changing is the index, right? Can we see that? It's exactly the same code up to the 0 and the -1. Okay, so then let's do something interesting that I think makes descriptors very powerful, but also potentially confusing. Because remember, if a descriptor is an object, notice that I defined the class, and over here at the bottom, I instantiated it. So this instance here, this can be customized. This instance, this can be customized. So what I want to do is I want to replace these two with a more generic name descriptor. And I want to customize them to say exactly that the name descriptor for the first concerns itself with the index 0, and the name descriptor for the last concerns itself with the index -1. This is perfectly fine. If nameDesc is a class that I'm about to define, then I can pass in arguments. This is perfectly fine. And so how do I have to define the name descriptor for this to work? Well, these things here, these are indices that get passed into inits. And what's the index there? It's the thing that I'll be using to index into names. And so I'll just save it. And then for the get and the set, I can copy because I'm lazy. And now instead of hard coding the indices, what do I do? What do I replace these with? Yeah, exactly. So you get it. Perfect. So now, can I run this? Will this run? Well, hopefully it will. Let's see. Brilliant, it runs. It's the same results, okay? So yeah, are you with me so far? Yeah? Okay, excellent. Because, believe it or not, well, there's a lot more to descriptors than just this, but these are the beginnings. And if you understand the basics, then you have the foundation to go and read, for example, the document I was telling you about, which made a lot more sense after I had the first insights into how descriptors work. And this parallelism between properties and descriptors, it's not by chance, okay? And I'll spoil it after I'm done with this. I'll spoil you what the relationship really is, because there is something that makes a lot of sense and that makes it easier to, or that validates my intent of showing you how descriptors work by showing you a property and then the descriptor equivalent. All right, so one more awkward pause while I check my notes. Let's pretend I'm just drinking water. Okay. All right, so for the third or fourth time today, I said that there's a relationship between properties and descriptors. And if you define a getter for the property, so the thing we started with, the first, if you try to assign to first, what would you get? If this weren't here, what will I get if I run this code? Well, the IDE gives it away, but what do I get? Red squiggly line usually means error, right? So I get an error. Why? Because if the property does not define a setter, then if I try to set the property, Python screams at me. So how can we do this with descriptors? Do descriptors behave the same way? Well, let's find out. It's the best thing that I can tell you is if you have a question, just try to figure it out. So let's see if this works. Now, who thinks it will error out? I'm just asking, who thinks it will work for real? Who thinks it will look like it works? Okay, yeah, let's see what happens. Oops, did I try to run a file that doesn't exist? It's not Python, it's person, sorry. I can't even type, let alone teach. So it looks like it worked. Weird, right? Because I said Steve.first is going to be Rodrigo, and then I printed Steve.first, and I got Rodrigo back. But actually, let's dig in. So I'll add an I flag here, and now I have access to Steve. Let's check the names of Steve. What do you think I will see when I press enter? Yeah, exactly. So what I did was, I didn't really set Steve's first name, I just overwrote it. So the instance has a var that's called first. That's why I wrote, that's what happened when I assigned to Steve. So I changed the attribute on the instance while the descriptor still lives in the class. Okay, and what I want to do is, I want to create something that errors out, like the property. So the way to do that is, well, you still use def set, because set runs when you set an attribute, but instead of letting it set something, you just raise an error. Right? And be careful who's reading your code, but because it's for myself, I can say this. And now if I run this, what do I get? I get a runtime error. Because I'm trying to assign something and the descriptor doesn't let me do it. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Now I want to do something else. I want to create yet another descriptor for you to show you one third thing. So let's call this, I don't know, point.py. So what I'll do is I'll create a class. It's just a point, as in like a 2D point. It takes x and y values. And then I'm going to create private attributes to save this information. So I want to create some sort of read-only attributes for x and y. And I want to do it with a general descriptor. So I want to create something that's a read-only descriptor. We'll see what we have to put there. And I want to type in read-only here and y equals read-only here. Can I write such a general descriptor? Is this possible? Well, the start is pretty simple. I can just copy, where is it? The stupid from here. I can just paste it here. And now if I create a point, let's see, p equals point, 1, 2, p.x equals 73. This does not work, right? Why? Because the set makes sure that the value doesn't go through. But now what I want to do is I want to be able to actually access the values. I want to be able to get them. And if I try to print, the only thing I get is the object itself, while I wanted the 1, right? Well, this is easy to fix. What dunder method do I use when I want to get an attribute from a descriptor? Yes, exactly. So then, well, I take the person, I take the class, and the value x is hidden in it's not a person. Please don't let me do these silly things. It's not a person, it's a point, so I can just return the value that's hidden there. And now this works, except it really doesn't, because now if I print p of y, then I get x again, because I hard-coded it here. Right? It's hard-coded. So this is yet another thing that I find very amusing about descriptors. There are tools that let you do this. So what I want to do is, I want, in some, let's not touch our faces. So in some way, I want the descriptor to be aware of its name. So the read-only on line 10, it's much more fun to point with your hands than to use the cursor. That's for newbies. So the read-only in line 10 needs to be aware that it's being assigned to x. X. I don't know, there's something about this mic that's throwing me off. And the read-only on line 11 should be aware in some way. It should be aware in way that it's being assigned to y. That's what I want. And there is a mechanism oh, this is the microphone. Yeah, so there's a mechanism that lets me do that. And it's another dunder method. And it's a dunder method that's called, very conveniently, setName. So what does this method do? It will notify the descriptor of the name of the variable that it's being assigned to. Do you get how meta this is? So this descriptor will be made aware of the name of the attribute that it's being assigned to. And that's very convenient, because now what I can do here, and of course the parameters here are switched, now I can say that the descriptor is going to save for itself the attribute name. And if I have access to the attribute name, instead of hard-coding the _x, I can use some dynamic Python to build the name of the actual private attribute. And now this should run. And it does. So if you see here, there's a print x, print y, and we get a 1, 2. Right? So set name here, let's just print something. So set name with name equals, like that. And now if I run it again, notice how we get the calls to really show you that the dunder method set name was called with 2 different strings, them being the names of the attributes. All right? So this is the third point that I wanted to tell you about, which is the dunder set name. Now there's one tiny little thing that I should mention, and that is set name isn't a descriptor thing, all right? Dunder set and dunder get make a descriptor. Dunder set name is just a convenience thing you can use outside of the descriptor world. It's in this situation when you're setting an attribute, but it's not a descriptor thing. So far, so good? Excellent. So let's summarize the 3 things we've seen, and those are that the dunder get runs on attribute access, that's the first thing we saw, and a dunder get makes a descriptor. If a class implements dunder get, that class is a descriptor. Dunder set runs on attribute assignment. Dunder set makes a descriptor. If a class has dunder set, that class is a descriptor. And dunder set name notifies a descriptor of the attribute name. So dunder set name, it doesn't run every single time there's an assignment, all right? It's only when you're assigning inside a class. It's only when you're assigning a class attribute at class definition. So, but you can look it up. Go read the docs, that's what I did, so you can do it as well. Right, so these were the 3 main ideas here. Now, obviously, we didn't cover everything there is to know about descriptors. There's plenty of interesting interactions. There's a third method that makes a descriptor that I didn't even discuss. Why are they applauding me? I'm not done yet, just wait a second. But I'm almost done. And yeah, so there's plenty of stuff to figure out about descriptors. And now I can spoil you why I said that there's a pretty close relationship between descriptors and properties. And maybe you knew, maybe you could figure it out, but a property is a descriptor. Where's the get? Here it is. So descriptors power properties. A property is just a specific descriptor. And, well, there's more. Who can guess? Well, now I wrote it down. Static method is a property. Sorry. Static method is a descriptor. And also, class method is a descriptor. So there's 3 built-in descriptors in Python. So if someone tells you descriptors are dark magic, no one uses them, well, that's clearly wrong. There's 3 of them built in. And also, let me define a simple function. It does nothing. Notice that a function is a descriptor. So when I asked you if you've used the descriptor, all of you have. Maybe you didn't know, but all of you have. And then there's plenty of possible follow-up talks on how methods and descriptors are very much related. Find me after if you want me to show you an interesting thing. All right, so to wrap up, I just want to say, everyone asks me, this was built with Snapify. I have no affiliation. It's just the software I used. Pretty cool. And now, we're pretty much done. There's lots of other things to be said about descriptors, and I've written about them extensively. Now, what this QR code does is it takes you to a secret portal that asks you to rate this talk, because I like talking a lot, but if the audience doesn't like it, I don't have a future ahead of me. So if you scan the QR code, you're going to get 2 multiple choice questions. It's pretty simple. And then after you submit it, you get links to the slide talks, to the talk slides, sorry, the other way around, to the code, which I'll post online, to my email address, to a bunch of other things I thought might be relevant, and also to backup slide talks. So talk slides, I keep getting this the other way around. So if live coding wouldn't work, I have backup talk slides, so if you want those, they will also be after you scan the QR code. So it's free, but it's not free because you have to scan it and fill in the form. Yeah, so thank you for putting up with me. It's typically not easy. And if we have a couple of minutes, maybe a question or two?
Yep. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Yeah, thank you.
So, how many of you have a question? Oh, yeah. There we have.
Don't be shy, but if you ask difficult questions, chances are I don't know the answer. Yeah, no, but you can, I mean, you can ask it, and then we can all laugh. Yes.
JK. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, have you ever tried to benchmark
No.
using...
Sorry, but you can ask, but no.
Okay, yeah, that's it.
No, but you can ask. I mean,
Using properties versus descriptors versus accessing
I
attributes
don't know.
directly for setting and getting.
I have no idea. No, so no, I haven't tried to benchmark. I was just trying to think if I could guess something. I don't know if properties are implemented. So properties are descriptors, but if they're implemented in C, which I don't know if they are, if they're implemented in C, that maybe it's going to be faster than if you spin up your own property. But the point of this talk was not forget property, implement your own descriptors. The point of the talk was if you understand property, you can understand descriptors. Okay, so property is still valid. That's why we use property instead of descriptors. That's why we use sum instead of reduce. The point was if you need to customize attribute access, then you use a descriptor. So I wouldn't try to replace property with a custom-made descriptor. Yeah. But if you run the benchmarks, let me know. Thank you for the question.
Do you know if descriptors work well with data classes, or are there issues there?
I have no reason to believe they wouldn't, but it's just a matter of writing code and figuring out. Because the descriptors run when you type object dot something, when you do regular attribute access, Python will see if that name brings up something with a dunder get or a dunder set or a dunder delete, and if it's there, it doesn't really matter if it's a data class or something else. It's just going to call those specific methods. So it should work just fine. Should.
Yeah, so I think if the data class is frozen, maybe it may not work, is it?
I don't know. I don't know a lot. What does it mean to be frozen? That the attributes can't be changed, but does it get... Sorry.
Yeah, the attributes cannot be changed, exactly. So see, if you cannot really have a setter because the attribute is set at the beginning when you created the data class, right?
Mm-hmm.
The instance of the data class. Really.
But you can have the descriptors only with the get, so maybe you don't need the set.
Yeah.
So it depends, yeah. But if the attribute is frozen, then if you're trying to set something that cannot be set, but the get would still work probably, right?
Yeah, the get, yeah, it would work.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Thanks.